important people. So okay, I think we will start right now. Okay, good morning, Dr. Zhiqiang Feng, and good evening for all audience. I don't know, maybe good afternoon for some people as well. I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Feng to give us a lecture today to talk about health geography research. Actually, this topic we discussed this summer, and Dr. Feng mentioned that this research field has been developing over decades in the Western countries, and it is getting popular in China recent years as well. So I think it's worth to invite Dr. Feng to give us the relevant topic about health geography. So Dr. Feng's resume is he is a senior lecturer at the Institute of Geography School of Geosciences at the University of Edinburgh right now. He obtained his PhD from Lancaster University. Prior to that, he got his bachelor degree from Peking University and the Chinese Academy of Sciences, respectively. He's also affiliated with the Longitudinal Study Centre Scotland and the Scottish Centre for Administrative Data Research. His research interests include geography of health, population, health equity, longitudinal analysis, migration, computing, ArcGIS, and spatial analysis. He serves as a member of Economic and Social Research Council peer review college responsible for proposal review and project report assessment. Of course, he published many papers in different journals, so I won't speak that out right now. So I think the method that Dr. Feng used is a little bit different from our traditional experimental-based research method. I think, especially today, because of the development of database developing, big data technique developing, and also ArcGIS developing, I think combined both big data and ArcGIS and other techniques, I think we can start a very fascinating health relevant research in the future. So I hope Dr. Feng's lecture today could give us a little bit different inspirations and wills today. So welcome, Dr. Feng, to start our lecture today. And after this, his talk, and we're gonna have around 20 minutes Q&A period, and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang, for invitation, and also thank Dr. Xu for making the arrangement. So I'll share my screen now. Okay, yes. So here is in UK still in the morning. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who come to this talk. So the title of the talk is Use of Routinely Collected Data in Geographical Research of Health. I'm like Dr. Zhang mentioned, I'm a senior lecturer in School of Geoscience in University of Edinburgh, and also I'm affiliated with the Scottish Centre for Administrative Data Research and also Scottish Longitudinal Study these are the investment from the UK Research Council over years. They have put in money, multi-million monies in data infrastructure. During this talk, I'll introduce what are routinely collected data and the potential benefits of using this linked routinely collected data, and also what challenges we'll face when we use this data, and also because we talk about the geography of health, so a very brief introduction to space, place, and health. And also I'll give 3 examples just showing how we can use routinely collected data in health geography research. And then finally, conclusion. So I'd like to start with this quotation from one of the leading figure in linked data research. Dr. Dang, he is a leading figure in, he's from USA, and he's a leading figure in vital statistics, and particularly in linking data for health research. So we know life is composed of many stages, and the principal events in life influence all of us through different periods of time. And if we can compile each page of life into a book, we can understand our life through life course perspective, and understanding better how early events influence our later health, well-being, and other life chances. So the definition of routinely collected data is not that simple, because there is no universally accepted definition. But to put it simply, we can say routinely collected data are data collected on a daily basis from various agencies and departments. Obviously, nowadays they are electronically collected and also stored in database. So the definition can be a narrow one or a broad one. Here we simply use whether or not the data come from or collected by public agencies or private agencies as this separation of the two definitions. The reason of doing this is important, and particular for legal reasons, because the data collected by public agencies, we normally have different legal framework for researchers to access and use the data compared to the data from the private agencies. This is important in the UK's context, because in UK, for example, the National Health Service, NHS, is a public body, because NHS is paid by the income tax. So the data is normally held in the public agencies, and also we have laws to regulate how to use the data. If you want to access data from private let's say, hospital or insurance company, also you need a different legal framework. Secondly, the routinely collected data can be defined by purpose for which they are collected. So if you are unemployed, so normally you obviously go to job center to register, and then you can receive unemployment benefit. And if you go to school or university, your data will be collected and stored by the relevant education departments. And the data obviously is for the produced in the administrative process and for the purpose of delivering a particular service. For example, if you go to dental service, you receive service of the maybe dental surgery, and your data will be kept in the surgery. And the data is for administrative purpose and not for research. So this is also important to remember. No matter you are doing experiment or you doing observational research, if you collect data yourself, you always get involved heavily in terms of designing the data collection. But this is not the case for routinely collected data. So in terms of characteristics of routinely collected data, firstly, very important, these data are for individuals. And so these are personal data in the legal term. And they, because it's individual personal data, so it's likely to disclose the privacy of individuals, especially for patients. These are medical records and highly sensitive. So in UK, there is a legal regulation called GDPR. It's a general data protection regulation. Actually, the GDPR was firstly developed in the Europe before Brexit, but right now it continues to be used in the UK. So it's very important to keep privacy of the data, and also make sure the data is de-identified before we can use the data. And also the data is less likely to be agreed with the individual. So there is no consent for researchers to use the data. So one thing obviously we have to realize, we as researchers have to safeguard the data as well. And secondly, because the data is collected by different agency other than our researchers, so it's secondary data. Like I said before, obviously we don't have contribution or have to the data collection process. So the design of the questions, for example, is not up to researchers. So we have to realize not every interesting questions or important questions are in the data set. Third, I'd like to mention is about whether not routinely collected data can be regarded as a type of big data. So it really depends how you define what big data is. We know people normally simply refer big data as big volume. Obviously, that's not simply the case. And we more likely to consider the big data is the modern data collection process. For example, it tend to be collected through some sort of automatical process. So this process, for example, if you use mobile phone, you use internet, your data will be collected by the mobile phone service providers or internet service providers. In this case, for routinely collected data, your data normally is automatically collected by government agencies or maybe private agencies. And in terms of the size of the data, if you think that even the hospital admission data could be include millions of people or even tens of millions of people for England or Scotland. And so, and the data obviously likely to be over many years. So it is still a huge data set. And in terms of the types of routinely collected data, obviously at first we are interested in health data. So they include the patient records and describing health-related disease events, because the patients obviously has some contact with health services. And secondly, about the demographic data, most likely this will come from the population census, and it describes populations and also maybe the household members. In UK, the population census, they also ask general health questions like long-term illness and general health. And the vital events data also collected by government, so we can get birth, marriage, and also mortality data. Other relevant information could be important as well. That would include information maybe on potential lifestyle or other aspects of social economic condition. And these are all important for our research. And the benefit of routinely collected data are many. So firstly, because in most cases, the data will be in a very large, had a very large sample size. Sometimes it covers full population. So in terms of population census, because it's legally required for everyone, every one, for example, in the UK, you have to fill the form. Otherwise, you will face a penalty of £1,000. So potentially that would include 100% of the population in the country. And anybody, because if you use the medical service, obviously your data will be collected. And this is important because you can use the large data for any research on maybe potentially rare medical conditions, for any small social groups, for example, some minority groups. And also, this is important for our geographical or environmental research of health, because we would be able to concentrate on some small local areas because of the large data set. This is not impossible if you collect data by doing a health survey, because the survey normally in UK possibly you only have maybe 10,000 households. That's not useful for doing some detailed geographical research. Secondly, the data will be longitudinal. Like I said, the data could be from birth up to death. So you can adopt a life course approach in research. This is, again, very important to study what factors can influence health and well-being at a later stage. And potentially you have less measurement error because you assume the administration, they would do lots of quality assurance, and also because people have to register some services, so there is a less issue of attrition compared to longitudinal survey. And the other important thing is we have these clinical measures on medical conditions, because the condition also will be assessed by the doctors, for example, so it's not self-reported. Other benefits, if we compare to health survey, it tend to be low cost because the data is already in the database. So the only cost that involves maybe the extraction of the data. And the data also tend to be highly up-to-date, because every patient record will be up-to-date in the database. So this is again important, because in UK, for example, people have used the routinely collected data. They link the patient records and with the published census, and look at the inequality in terms of COVID-19 infection and the COVID-19 mortality. Potentially, you can do real-time analysis using the routinely collected data. And you can also apply some novel analytical approaches. Even the routinely collected data itself is observational. You can maybe design using some quasi-experimental methods. You can evaluate policy, and you can create counterfactuals, maybe potentially use some matching methods. And this control can be obviously decided post hoc. And one very important benefit is linked routinely collected data allow us to answer some novel questions. So for us, for example, we could link the data to environmental indicators, so we can answer questions like how environmental pollution, for example, influence people's health and well-being. Although there are so many benefits of using routinely collected data, there are many challenges as well. The firstly is the legal or ethical issues, because we have to follow the legal framework, regulations, and we have to make sure data are properly protected. And according to the GDPR, even the data is not with consent from patient, we can still use the data for the public's benefit. This is a key element allowing researchers to access and use the data. And we have to make the data safe by identifying the data. And also we need to make the project safe. We have to go through the application process, and there will be a panel to look at the proposal and make decision whether or not the proposal is good enough for doing research using routinely collected data. And sometimes this process can be time consuming. And for example, we have a project that's ongoing. We are looking at when not commuting had any impact on mental health. And our application takes about half a year, more than half a year to get approval. And also the access environment is important. So the data normally is kept in a secure environment, and we have to go to the safe setting to use the data, and the result will be evaluated by a panel as well. So you can't publish anything from the results without disclosure control. There are other data issues, potentially even the quality could be good, but there are potential issues because the linking process may produce errors, and the transcribing of some data also involves some errors as well. And the analytical issue would involve, because sometimes you have large sample size. This is beneficial, but on the other hand, the huge or very large sample size would more likely to produce false positives or sometimes false negatives. So you have to consider how you can deal with problem. So here is an example. Our Scottish longitudinal study is a record linkage study, and it includes 5.5% of Scottish population. It is representative of the whole population and based on 20 semi-random birthdays. So everyone in Scotland, if their date of birth is one of the 20, will be in the database. So the sample size is fairly large, include about 270,000 people, and also include the household members. And it includes many topics. One of the key advantage of the data is it can be linked to detailed geographical information. So I wrote a work paper for the study. So basically introduce users what geography are available in the data set. The data include the population census, birth, deaths, and marriages, residential mobility, and school education data, weather, pollution data, and also from NHS data include many hospital admission, prescribing, psychiatric, and cancer registration as well. Here is a simple example just showing female member, for example, age 21 at the 1991 census, and her information will be kept in the database. For example, she got married and then gave birth to first and second child, then move out of Scotland and re-entry to Scotland, and then unfortunately had stillbirth. And one, we also had census data for her, and later on she gave birth to a third child, and unfortunately died at a later stage. If we link to NHS data, we would have hospital admission data, and we actually know what treatment she's been subject to. So in terms of geographical research of health, we normally consider the environmental context that includes the physical, cultural, and the socio-economic environment. Obviously, this is multi-dimensional, and they all potentially influence individuals' life and well-being. And this is quite important because we have to understand what are potential mechanisms linking the environmental factors to individuals' health and well-being. And lots of evidence has suggested environmental factors are important. For example, pollution also is potentially harmful for people's respiratory health. And research shows heavy air pollution will increase risk for people's respiratory disease. And in recent years, one of the key development in health geography is to apply the life course perspective or theory in health research, health geography research. And we know individuals' health related to their individual space-time trajectory on a daily basis, but it's also, if you look at the long term, and the people may move from different places, and also even you stay in one place, but the environment may change through time. And this environmental exposure at some particular key period may be more important compared to others. So we call critical period. And also environmental exposure may be cumulative. So for example, if you stay in one place that's heavily polluted for over a long period of time, maybe you are more likely to be suffer from the negative impact. So it is important to do research for health geography using routinely collected data. So the key here would be how can we link geographical variables to the routinely collected health data. And geography actually is one of the most disclosive variables because if you know somebody's address, you can immediately identify somebody. So we have to make sure geographical identifier have to be manipulated or deleted from the final database. So traditionally, data providers allow researchers to have geographical identifiers, for example, and then they drop other health data and allow researchers to create geographical variable and then link to identifiers. And then the provider maybe themselves link to the health data, but drop the identifier of his address, and then pass the data to research. But right now, the practice has been changed because the detailed fine scale addresses are not allowed to be accessed by researchers. So the third party will be carry out of the linking of geographical variables for researchers. So in this case, for example, researchers may create geographical variables and pass to third party. Third party will use the geographical identifier they can access to link to health data and eventually create the research data for researchers access. So eventually, for researchers, they will be forbidden from the data linkage process in this case, and they only access the final research data. So now I'd like to give a quick introduction to three examples. One is the natural space and the birth weight. The second is pollution and mortality. And the third is air pollution and the birth weight. So the first one is a sibling study of whether maternal exposure to different type of natural space is related to birth weight. So we know green space and also natural space that include, for example, blue space as well, are beneficial for people's health and well-being. And the research has shown the mechanism, for example, access to green space may encourage people use the green space for physical activity, for building social cohesion. And green space also tend to reduce the pollution, so it's good place for people carry out for physical activity. So in this case, this research used the live birth data between May 1991 and December 2020, and they used a Scottish longitudinal study. So they include all mothers 16 years of age and over, and they link to the natural space data. The live births are only for singletons, because the twins obviously tend to have lower birth rate. So the natural space included all public and also include the private natural surfaces as well. So that includes vegetation, water, sand, mud, and rock, and also private gardens. And by accessible, they define 100-meter buffer around people's home. So they count the percentage of the buffer that has natural space. And then it is the longitudinal study team actually carry out of the data linkage instead of the research. So eventually the research only uses the data that has birth weight, socioeconomic variables, demographic variables, and also geographical variables linked to the data. And the methods they use is the ordinary linear square and also fixed effect models. So their research basically find there is a robust within mothers relationship between total natural space and birth weight. And particular for women who already had children, and also mothers have intermediate level of education. So they found the natural space combined with actually more important and quite interesting. They didn't find any beneficial impact from specific types. And I think so their research obviously suggests it's useful, it's beneficial for people access natural space because obviously the birth rate is very important in terms of influencing people's long-term health and well-being. The second research I'd like to introduce is historic air pollution exposure and mortality risk. This is in England and Wales. So the data they use is called the Office for National Statistics longitudinal study. That's the sister study of Scottish longitudinal study. So they have data also linked sensors and also live events data. In this case, they have three pollutions: black smoke, sulfur dioxide, and PM10. And this data obviously they have much longer follow-up from 1971 up to 2009. So they link pollution data, for example, they link black smoke of 1971 to 81 and 1991. And for SO2, that's 71 up to 91. And for PM10, this data is from 2001. Pollution data basically is generated by the national agency. It's based on 1 kilo by 1 kilo grids. And they link to geography for 81, 91, 2001 actually is converted into world. So here is their result. Basically, they show for black smoke of 1971, they continuously associated with higher risk of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease mortality, and also respiratory mortality. So they did show a long-term impact of pollution, but the results also show the later or the more recent pollution is more important compared to earlier ones. The third example I like to give is air pollution and the birth weight. Again, this is a piece of work using Scottish longitudinal study. In this case, they use 1994 up to 2008. And for birth weight, they have used the birth weight in grams, and also they divide into a binary. So low birth weight is under 2,500, and also they use the continuous measure of birth weight as well. And then they also look at the preterm birth as well, but I don't go into detail for that research now. So here is some summary of the measures for pollution and for birth. So the result they show is the residential pollution obviously is associated with higher risk of low birth weight. This research right now, the table is based on the logistic regression. And then they also include the residential and the pollution level at workplace. Surprisingly, they didn't find much difference between the association simply between residential or the combined measure between of residential and the workplace. So it's more likely the pollution at workplace is more random, so it didn't contribute too much to the birth rate in this case. So to conclude, so linking routinely collected data is very useful, and the data has been shown is huge value in health research. And if we can link to environmental factors, that we can investigate the impact of environmental factors on health and well-being, and potentially we can also apply the longitudinal data analysis methods and investigate in what are potential critical period of environmental exposure on health and well-being, and also maybe you can look at people's mobility, how mobility and environmental interact and contribute to health and well-being. And the use of individual level data obviously is beneficial also because it's free of ecological fallacy. And we know lots of research has been carried out for in environmental health analysis based on aggregate data. So if we use individual level data, also it's we don't have this ecological fallacy. And then also using routinely collected data allow us to apply some quasi-experimental design. Even the data itself, remember, observational is difficult to make causal inference in this case. And the longitudinal structure I mentioned also is has great value, and we can look at the long-term trend and also long-term impact. And also we can use the data to do some policy evaluation. Okay, I think that's all from me. So thank you for listening. I'd like to answer some questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Feng. I think that's quite interesting. Well, because I don't the date problems and also connect the different territory data, for example, from environmental, social environmental or natural environmental data and health data. It's quite challenging in China, I think, right now. So, okay, let's start the QR period. I will start one question first. So, you mentioned that the GDPR in the UK, and is it possible that just to explain a little bit more about the GDPR, how it works in Europe or in the UK?
Okay, yeah, okay, that's a very good question. GDPR obviously is not only about health data, it's about the general any data basically. So every government agencies, companies, including university, you have to observe the GDPR. A very simple example is because we hold we have seminar series, for example, and obviously we tend to have participants, and normally if you don't have consent from the participants, you can't hold the participants' email for a longer period. So the GDPR in general is a regulation in our research case. So we have to make sure, because remember our data, for example, patient records, we don't have consent from patients for researchers to use that. So you have to make sure your research is for the public benefit. But you have to justify what is the public benefit in your proposal, right? So you have to say something, okay, why, for example, in our research on commuting and mental health, we have to say, okay, commuting obviously is very important for most people. Obviously, most people travel to work, for example, and also research has shown commuting sometimes particular long distance commuting tend to be harmful for people's mental health. And particularly, we could improve people's commuting experience, and if government can intervene. And also, we know active travel obviously is beneficial for mental health and well-being, and we can provide evidence if we show, for example, active travel is beneficial, so government may invest infrastructure, let's say build cycle paths, cycle routes, and allow people to use cycles to travel to work. So the GDPR, you can see they cover every aspect of people's use of data, and even for private companies. So you have to observe the regulation.
Okay, thank you. So if we follow the GDPR, so, can we see the data specifically? I mean, face to face to see the data, or we only can see the result?
Okay, yeah, so that's also a very good question. So for our researchers, remember I mentioned the data had to be de-identified or anonymized. So the personal identifier, such as name, has been removed from the data set. But even after that, because you can use other individual level data like age, date of birth, marital status, socioeconomic status, and like I said, the geographical identifier like a residential address is highly disclosive. And so the data normally will be kept either in a standalone computing system that's not connected to internet, or a heavily protected network. And normally we can come to the safe setting. For example, maybe it's in the government agencies, you sit in front of the computer monitor and you can see the data. You can use the data, access data, but you can't take away any of the data. You have to, even when you want to present your research result to maybe conference audience or publish in journal papers, you have to go through the called statistical disclosure control, SDC. So that means the data center will have people, normally they call support officer. They will look at the your research result every table and make sure your table will not disclose any individual information. For example, we do have some rules in our center. For example, we don't allow cell count that is fewer than less than 10 to be reported in any publications. And even you have some graph or diagram that you also have this graph subject to disclosure control, and make sure, yeah, that's not disclosing.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I think for the audience, if you have questions, if you want to talk to Dr. Feng, I think you can ask me to invite you into this talk, or you can just write down your questions in the Q&A section. Okay, in the Q&A section, there's another question. I want to know that how is the statistical data linked to the health and the disease data spatially? In fact, the statistical data are often available at different spatial scale than the health and the disease data. I think that's there's a problem in China. So do you mind to give us some suggestions about that?
Okay, yeah, this is also a very good, interesting question, actually. So the statistical data, I assume that when you say mean statistical, I assume that's at a different spatial scale. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So for the individual level data, for example, we have their residential address, right? So the residential address in the UK, normally we don't have individual addresses, but we have postcode. So each postcode, about the size of the postcode is roughly 20 to 30 households. So it's very, very small geographies. So we can use postcode to link to any higher level geographies. We can also use postcode to calculate distance to any geographic, like green space, for example. So in this case, obviously, in terms of linking, so the data center, for example, our data center, we hold the postcode data, and then we have a lookup table, right? So lookup table would link postcode to any geographies above postcode. And I assume when you say statistical data are often available at a different spatial scale, but that different spatial scale can always link to the lower level, right? Lower level or lower level could be singularly grid reference if you have coordinates of the residential address or address of workplace. And then you can have this lookup table, and then you can link to potentially any statistical data that's generated based on different geographies. Have I answered your question?
But I think the problem is, I think the statistical data at soil level, it's really difficult to see the lower level, the lower scale. So basically, we couldn't see the individual part, individual data. We couldn't see it. It's not like in the UK or in the other Western countries. The statistical data could be like in the individual scale, and we can find it.
So you mean you don't have individual health data or
health data, yes, but I mean the environmental data, or yeah, maybe it's wrong.
I guess environmental data would be always spatial at a different scale. So the health data or disease data, normally you can get maybe individual level data. So it's health data and then link to environmental data. Obviously, you need some geographical identifiers. So basically, that's the address data. So you obviously need address data to link to the environmental data in this case.
The health and disease data, I don't know that we can find the address data like you mentioned in the UK.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, but yeah, because potentially, yeah, so it really depends on the agencies that provide the health data, because they should have address data. So the question would be whether or not they are able or they are allowed to provide the data to researchers. Because one thing in UK, for example, sometimes they are more cautious about providing geographical data, so they don't give you accurate address. They don't give you very precise address, but they may give you a higher level geography instead. So in Scotland, for example, data zone, that's the higher level geography. Roughly every data zone include about 750 people. So that would reduce the risk of disclosure in this case. So potentially, yeah, they can give you individual data, but for geography, they only give you data zone code. But if they give you data zone code, also you can use data zone code to link to any other geography, any other environmental indicators, including pollution or maybe access to hospital, access to green space, for example. That even it's not ideal because data zone in the countryside still are quite large, but in city it's quite small, it's quite accurate already.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fo. Thank you for your explanation. Okay, another question is it possible to consider expanding the sample to explore the impact of cultural background or other characteristics such as medical treatment and health risk assessment?
Yes. So in our case, for example, our data because come from remember I said our Scottish longitudinal study data, for example, we have data from population census. So population census, they include the question asked about people's ethnicity. So so you would know people's cultural background, for example, whether or not they are Indian, they are Black Caribbeans, Black African, or Chinese. So you potentially can obviously link this data to the patient records, right? So you can analyze when not minority they face discrimination in UK, and when not they have higher risk of mortality. Lots of research in UK has been done. Look at the, for example, the inequality in terms of ethnicity. So right now they found, for example, Black people or South Asian, they have higher COVID-19 mortality. So basically what they do is they link the census to the COVID-19 mortality data or infection, and they carry out of the research. So potentially you, depending what additional data you can access to, you can link the data to health data. So that make you expand basically your research area enormously, basically. So health data obviously is our center data set, and then you can link to other data set from, sometimes you can link data from school, for example, or university, to look at educational attainment and also the health outcomes. And then obviously that's another way to look at social economic status, I think, from education perspective.
Okay, thank you. There's another one. who is asking how to get data SLS.
Okay, yeah. So I can give you, if you I can give you the website if you are interested. So the data access is you need to submit. Need to submit applications. Also, you need to look at the data dictionary and see what research you can carry out using. Okay, so I can't type in, right? I can't type in from the Q&A box.
Let me see. I think I can
only chat.
invite this person into. Wait a moment. Let me see where.
So
Oh, I can't see him right now.
Okay.
In my list.
Sorry. Yeah, it's anonymous attendee.
Yeah.
No, so I put in the chat box. I don't know why not you can see the chat box, but yeah, it's fairly straightforward if you search online the sls.ilscs.sac.uk. So that's the website.
Okay, I copy.
And all the information is there, including how to apply to use the data. So the data is free for people to use. But your application will go through we call research board. Research board will assess whether not a project is beneficial, and then if they says okay, you can go ahead to access data, and normally a support officer will be allocated and to support the researchers go through all the process of applying and also accessing. The other quite interesting development is over last 5 years roughly, we developed the synthetic data, so we can create the simulated data from the real data set. So that's allow researchers to access the synthetic data. You can have a copy of the synthetic data. You can take the synthetic data away and doing your modeling exercise. So that's quite important development.
Okay, that reminded me another question. So is it only free for the research in the UK or in the world, this data?
That's a very good question. It is a little bit weak actually right now. Quite a while ago, we had one application from Israel. We didn't charge anything for the researcher. But we also have lots of collaborations from UK researchers and other European researchers. But normally, if I guess the best thing to do, perhaps, also, is you have a UK collaborator, and then
okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that maybe that's easier. Make things easier maybe.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Feng. I think it's the time to finish today. if anyone want to have more questions or something we want to discuss, I think you can email Dr. Feng as well. I think, right?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, feel free. Yeah, contact me if you have any further questions. Yes.
Okay, there's one thing I need to apologize. I think today the internet is not very good. During your speech is a little bit stuck, and also I'm so sorry that there was a black line on the top at the top of your screen. I think probably many audience saw that problem as well. Okay, I think this is it. Thank you very much, Dr. Feng. Say goodbye.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Zhang. Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Xu. Okay,
Okay,
bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
谢谢张老师。
这就可以了，是吧？
对，应该这样就结束了。
好，我第一次弄这个 webinar，我都不太会操作。
没事，下次有机会请张老师再帮我们做一次主持人，有了经验就比较熟悉了。
对，而且你们这个好频繁，我觉得就是时间安排的特别紧，就是几乎是不是每天晚上都有？
对，因为这个应该是一周1到2次的样子。对。
反正我感觉我因为经常能收到这个消息，有时候我也会进去听一听，但是因为太频繁的话就会比较多嘛。
对，但是因为涉及的方向可能也比较多，所以每次就面向不同的一些方向的一些学者吧。
但是就是怎么说呢？
您讲没关系。
我就是如果因为是 webinar 嘛，所以可能不能够那个面对面交流。如果要是这样的话，可能就是能够，就比如说像我们这样讲话的话，可能会更好一点。
这个样子，
是吧？
但是
是不是？
对，但是因为国内可能就是它涉及到一些，就是很多他们不太习惯直接用这个 Zoom 来登录。所以我们这边就直接是用直播的方式，直播到 B 站上面，或者是直播到那个扣享学术平台上面，所以大家可能就只能去通过就是打字的方式来提问。
我不知道那个它有，就是直接点进去不行吗？就是你们要是发链接的话，不能够直接点进去吗？
是可以直接点进去的，但是他们可能就是要提前下载那个 Zoom 嘛。好像 Zoom 的客户端下载安装的时候，有些情况下不是特别顺利。像我的我用的那个华为的手机，其实荣耀的手机，我用那个 Zoom 的手机端是不太行的。
你用手机我都忘了，因为平时都用电脑，所以都不用手机。
对，有些对电脑是可以的，电脑的 Zoom 端是可以的，但是可能大家需要特意去下载啊之类的，可能没有什么国内不是一般用腾讯会议之类的，可能会更方便一点。
那你们现在你们现在可以正常了吗？仙林
目前学校还是管得比较严的，要申报进校，24小时核酸检测。
好吧。
您那边呢？南师怎么样？
我人不在南师，现在就我不在。
您现在在国外吗？
对。
您现在在冯老师那边，在冯老师那边吗？我说您现在是在冯老师那边吗？
不是，我在丹麦。所以好像还怎么说呢？因为我听我同事在南师的同事都讲，他们有很多都在家里关着了，不能出来。
是的，因为栖霞区现在好像疫情那个风险区比较多一点，现在管的也比较严。 尤其是学校是比较敏感的场所。
对，然后学生好像是最近不允许出校了，注意安全吧。你应该也
你也是，
什么
你也是。
大事情。好，
对
那我们今天就这样，然后后续
好嘞。
的还用我做什么吗？
后续的应该没有了。后续的话，如果还需要联系的话，我们来邮件联系。
就是好的。然
嗯
后上一次讲的12月份的那个教授，因为他这半年比较忙，我过几天我再问问他，看看他12月份的时间有没有定下来。
哎，好嘞，谢谢张老师。
不客气，那我们就先这样。
好，那您先忙，拜拜。
好，拜拜。